Now let me tell you about the birthday that changed my life forever. My name is Iris Tmain, and on the night I turned 18, my father smiled at me like everything was perfectly normal. The house was decorated with balloons. Music drifted through the living room. My relatives laughed while cutting slices of cake. To everyone else, it looked like the perfect birthday celebration. Then my dad quietly placed a hand on my shoulder. When everyone leaves, he whispered, "You're going to sign a few papers for your Uncle Wade. Nothing complicated, just a formality." I smiled. I nodded. But inside, something felt terribly wrong. Instead of asking questions, I slipped upstairs, opened my laptop, and logged into the secure account my grandparents' attorney had prepared months earlier. My heart pounded as midnight approached. The second the clock struck 12, I signed a single legal document. That one signature transferred control of my grandparents' entire inheritance, including a lakeside cabin, investments, and savings worth millions of dollars, into an irrevocable trust that no one else could touch. I closed the laptop without making a sound. Downstairs, my parents were still laughing with the guests. They had absolutely no idea their plan had already failed. The next morning, they would discover that everything they believed belonged to them had been legally protected years before. But to understand why my grandparents trusted an 18-year-old instead of their own children, we have to go back 6 years. I was 12 when my grandfather first took me to Cedar Lake. His old pickup truck rattled along the winding road until the trees opened to reveal a weathered cabin sitting beside the water. It wasn't fancy. The porch leaned slightly. The screen door squeaked every time it opened. The paint had faded under decades of sun and rain. Yet somehow it felt more like home than the house where I actually lived. Grandpa handed me one end of a wooden fence rail. "Help me with this," he said. We spent the morning replacing broken fence posts, measuring boards, and digging fresh holes. He never treated me like a child. He explained every step patiently, teaching me how to tell healthy wood from rotten timber with nothing more than the pressure of a thumb. "If the wood gives too easily," he said, "it's already too late." At lunchtime Grandma Vivian called us inside. Fresh sandwiches waited on the old kitchen table Grandpa had built with his own hands decades earlier. The cabin smelled of pine, old books, warm bread, and wood smoke. It smelled like memories. That evening we sat on the porch watching the lake glow gold beneath the setting sun. Grandpa looked across the quiet water before speaking. "This cabin stays in the family, Iris." I smiled. Then he added something I didn't understand until years later. "But remember this. Family isn't always the people you're born to. It's the people who show up, and the people who protect what matters." At 12 years old, I thought he was simply sharing another piece of grandfatherly wisdom. I had no idea those words were actually preparing me for the hardest battle of my life. From that summer on, Cedar Lake became my second home. Almost every weekend, Grandpa would pick me up early Saturday morning. While other kids spent their vacation sleeping in or playing video games, I learned how to repair loose porch boards, clean gutters, split firewood, and patch tiny roof leaks before they became expensive problems. Grandpa always smiled when I asked questions. "Take care of the little things," he'd say. "That's how you protect the big things." Grandma Vivian had her own lessons. She showed me where every family photo came from, why each book sat on its shelf, and how every scratch on the old kitchen table carried a story. To anyone else, it was just an old cabin. To me, it became a living memory. Back at home, however, things felt different. One evening during dinner, my father casually mentioned the cabin. "It's just sitting there losing money," he said while cutting his steak. "Property taxes keep going up. We should sell it before it becomes a burden." Mom nodded without hesitation. "That's probably the smartest choice." I looked up from my plate. "But Grandpa said the cabin should stay in the family." Dad laughed. "Not because it was funny. Because he didn't take my words seriously." "You were just a kid," he replied. He was being sentimental. The conversation immediately shifted to my younger sister's latest achievement. No one asked what I thought. No one remembered that I'd won the district science fair only weeks earlier. After dinner, while clearing the table, I noticed a glossy real estate brochure lying beneath a grocery list. "Lakefront property wanted, premium prices paid." Someone had circled the phone number in blue ink. I quietly placed the flyer exactly where I'd found it. For the first time, I wondered if my grandparents saw something coming that I couldn't yet understand. And deep inside, a feeling I couldn't explain began to grow. The answer came sooner than I ever expected. 2 years later, when I was 14, Grandpa Harold passed away. The funeral was held on a cold Tuesday morning beneath gray skies. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with damp earth as relatives gathered around his grave. I barely heard the pastor's words because I couldn't stop thinking about the last time Grandpa and I had sat together on the porch at Cedar Lake. I still had the blue plaid handkerchief he always carried in his pocket. I held it tightly through the entire service. At the reception afterward, everyone tried to look sad. Some cried. Others shared old stories about Grandpa's kindness. But not everyone was focused on remembering him. While carrying my untouched slice of pie back toward my seat, I noticed Dad and Uncle Wade standing near the dessert table. They weren't eating. They weren't talking about Grandpa. Uncle Wade had a thick manila folder tucked under his arm. I slowed my steps just enough to hear part of their conversation. "We need to move before probate gets complicated," Wade whispered. Dad nodded immediately. "We'll figure it out." My stomach tightened. They were discussing paperwork. At Grandpa's funeral. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. I wanted to think they were talking about something else. But deep down, I already knew. The cabin had become more important to them than the man who built it. I stayed silent. What else could a 14-year-old do? Life moved on, but Cedar Lake never left my heart. Every chance I had, I returned to the cabin with Grandma Vivian. She seemed smaller after Grandpa was gone, yet somehow stronger too. She refused to let the place fall apart. Together we repaired loose shutters, cleaned the chimney, planted flowers beside the porch, and polished the old wooden table until it shined. One quiet evening, while watching the sunset over the lake, Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your grandfather loved this place," she said softly. "He believed a home isn't measured by money. It's measured by the memories you protect." I nodded, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. "I'll always help take care of it," I promised. She smiled warmly. "I know you will." 2 years later, another heartbreaking phone call changed everything. Grandma became seriously ill. By the time I turned 16, she was too weak to leave her bed. When I visited her for the last time, she motioned for me to come closer. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Iris." I leaned down. "The cabin is yours." I blinked in surprise. She tightened her grip around my hand. "Promise me, don't let anyone take it." "I promise," I whispered through tears. She smiled one final time. Then she closed her eyes. I didn't realize it then, but that promise would become the most important one I would ever make. And before long, my own family would do everything they could to make me break it. After Grandma's funeral, the house felt strangely quiet. For me, it was the silence that follows heartbreak. For my father and Uncle Wade, it felt more like the silence before a business meeting. That very evening, I overheard Dad speaking in the garage. "Now we can finally deal with the property," he said. His voice wasn't filled with grief. It was filled with relief. A few minutes later, Uncle Wade called. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. "Let's move fast," Wade said. "The sooner we sell it, the better." I stood frozen in the hallway with a glass of water in my hand. For the first time, I realized something painful. Grandma's passing wasn't the end of a chapter for them. It was the beginning of an opportunity. From that day forward, Cedar Lake became my escape. Every Saturday morning, I'd drive out there by myself. I repaired torn window screens, cleaned fallen branches from the yard, painted weathered railings, and checked every corner of the cabin just as Grandpa had taught me years before. Each repair made me feel closer to them. Meanwhile, the conversations at home kept changing. Dad no longer called it Grandpa's cabin. Now it was always the family property. Uncle Wade started visiting more often, carrying folders full of paperwork and real estate listings. One evening I finally gathered the courage to speak. Grandma wanted me to keep the cabin. Mom looked at me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your grandmother was emotional near the end, Iris. This isn't about feelings. It's business." That single word echoed in my mind long after dinner ended. Because I finally understood something my grandfather had tried to teach me years ago. Some people see memories. Others only see money. And I was beginning to discover exactly which kind of family I belonged to. By the time I turned 17, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Dad had stopped asking. Now he was assuming. When you turn 18, he told me one evening, we'll take care of the paperwork and finally get that cabin sold. He spoke as though the decision had already been made. As though my opinion didn't matter. I simply nodded. Inside, though, I remembered every promise I had made to Grandpa and Grandma. A few weeks later, I drove to Cedar Lake alone. It was late autumn. The wind carried the scent of pine through the trees, and golden leaves covered the porch where Grandpa and I had spent countless evenings together. While cleaning an old hallway closet, I moved a stack of faded quilts. Behind them sat a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Vivian's handwriting. My heart skipped. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a business card. Margaret Caldwell, attorney at law. Underneath her name were 4 words that immediately caught my attention. Tmain Family Trust. Grandma hadn't left that card there by accident. She knew I would eventually find it. She knew I'd be the one taking care of the cabin. I carefully slipped the card into my wallet. At that moment, I didn't know exactly what it meant. But for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Looking back now, I realize my grandparents weren't simply leaving me a cabin. They were leaving me a responsibility. A promise. And they trusted me enough to keep it. That trust became stronger than fear. Stronger than guilt. And stronger than the pressure my own family would soon put on me. What happened after I called the number on that card changed everything. It uncovered a secret my grandparents had planned years before. A secret that would stop my father and Uncle Wade in a way they never saw coming. But that's a story for the next chapter. If there's one lesson I learned from all of this, it's that real wealth isn't measured by money, houses, or land. It's measured by the people who love you enough to protect your future, even when they know they won't be there to see it. My grandparents couldn't control what happened after they were gone. But they could make sure I had the strength, and the opportunity, to stand on my own. And for that, I'll be grateful for the rest of my life.